The Journal of Jesse Smoke, Part 7, page 70. June 14, 1838. Stories from the Camp. Going Snake, an elder of the 17 Winters, tells me the troops have arrived at his house, not at dawn, but just as they sat down to dinner. He refused to leave until all of his family members have been allowed to kneel and follow his lead as he prayed in Cherokee. Then, with great dignity, he rose and led his family for the last time from their home. Struck by a bear is, or was, a wealthy Cherokee. He owned a plantation with dozens of buildings, a large herd of beef cattle, 10 fine horses, and a grits mill. 40 people lived on his plantation, not including a dozen slaves. He was riding out to survey a broken fence when he heard the sound of gunfire coming from his home. Coming back over the hill, he saw a strange sight. His family and other Cherokees were being huddled behind an overturned wagon, while 2 parties of white men fought each other for possession of his home. One white man and his brothers had barricaded themselves in the living room, while the other white men poured round after round of gunfire at them. It only ended when the soldiers of the party of Tennessee volunteers came riding up the road. By that time, 2 of the white men had killed each other, and 3 others were seriously wounded. All of them were so worn by their pitched battle that they could only limp away without claiming any of the spoils. The Tennessee came too soon, Struck by a Bear said. If they had only waited another hour, those fool white men would have wiped each other out. Although Struck by a Bear was allowed to take his horses and wagons, which were used to convey other Cherokees too young, too old, or too infirm to walk to Cherokee camp, he received only a paper accounting for the rest of his property. However, he did come away with some actual coin, having sold the corn in his mill to the army quartermaster accompanying the troops. To the credit of those soldiers, they bought what they might have simply taken. It would be needed to feed many of the hungry captives. Struck by the Bear's slaves are not here in the camp. They vanished after he left his plantation. This worries him deeply. He fears that they have been taken by white men who will not treat them as human beings, as the way he did. Nancy, a Cherokee woman in her middle years with a family of 7, told me that the soldiers surrounded their house at midday. "You must go now," they said to her. "First I will feed the livestock," she said. Then she did so. When she got out back to the hogs, she told me she unlatched the gate. "Don't let the soldiers or the Georgians get you," she said to them in Cherokee. As she rode away, she heard a ruckus, and looked back to see all of her pigs heading for the woods, leaving the white men far behind them. With tears in her eyes and a certain pride, another young woman I shall call Rose, told me what happened when the soldiers tromped into their upstairs room where she sat with her grandmother. "Ladies," their lieutenant said, "you must leave now." "I go nowhere," her grandmother said in English. This was surprised Rose, who until then had thought her elder had no knowledge of the language. Then her grandmother simply leaned back in the chair, closed her eyes, and died. This so moved the lieutenant in command that he ordered his men to see that the old woman was buried beneath an apple tree in their backyard before the rest of the family was moved out. He then had the ground smoothed out and leaves raked over it to conceal the grave. He also ordered one man to stay behind for a time to see that the grave was not disturbed in case someone observed the burial. From what John Iron, who was the local Cherokee blacksmith, told me, it was well that the old woman's burying place was guarded, a rabble of thieves following the soldiers like jackals behind a lion. Not content with simply stripping the house of their contents, they were raiding Cherokee graves to collect the silver ornaments buried with our dead. John Iron was with the group of captives who passed one of our burying places. He saw no fewer than a dozen white men with shovels and picks in that ceremony, digging hard and eager to rob our graves. June 17, 1838. Under the light guard, by permission of the officer in command, 10 Cherokees went to the river and were baptized. It was a solemn and impressive service. The whites in attendance were much moved. June 20, 1838. Reverend Butler is among those who have attempted to call attention to our suffering in this camp, and the dozens or so others throughout what was once our nation. He obtained a small copy of the order sent on June 17th by General Scott in response to the accounts being circulated that we were poorly attended. Here are Scott's words. It is, I learned, reported that throughout this country the Indians collected in camps for immigration are sickly and dying in great numbers. I mention this to contradict it. The Indians are very generally in good health, and so are the troops. Please cause this to be the official announcement. In spite of General Scott's order, 3 died today in our camp, 2 baby girls and an elderly Negro woman. I assist in their burial. It was difficult to break the hard, dry earth. June 25th, 1838. Those held in our camp number, as I count them today, are 638. It is but hard to keep an accurate count. In these few weeks, 17 have died. Most were infants and old people. The weakest among us are the first to perish. More Cherokee are being driven in each day, collected in further points of our nation. Some who arrived today told of being herded across the Chickamauga River. Though we have to go to the water at the start of any of our old ceremonies, the rivers are known to be places of danger. Our old tales speak of the water monsters, such as the Uktana, who hide beneath the surface and drag down the unwary. The river must always be approached with care and respect, but at the Chickamauga, there were no time for care. Bayonets and clubs and curses were at our backs, and dozens of Cherokees drowned in the crossing. Another group was brought all the way from North Carolina, forced to walk more than 200 miles beneath the boiling sun. A number of them could not keep up with the line of the march and fell behind. One man told of hearing a rifle shots behind him as these stragglers were dispatched by impatient soldiers. It seemed that not one Cherokee will be allowed to remain. The land must be cleansed of us like soil washed from a pale hand. I am much discouraged today, and my jaw is swollen and aching greatly. My mother has given me herbs gathered from the forest. I am to chew them and pack them into my sore gums. The officer in charge of the camp allows the women to leave the camp to get firewood and gather food plants if they promise to return. He has learned that he can always trust any Cherokee to come back once they have made such a promise. Tomorrow I feel better. If I feel better, I shall describe what it is like in Camp Cherokee. It is not a good place. June 20th, 1838. I do not feel better the next day. I have a fever and was insensible. My mother bathed my forehead with cool cloths and held me in her arms as I shivered in the cold. Somehow she managed to make soup and feed me. Food is a problem here in Camp Cherokee. On first arrival, many of our people refused to accept the government's food. The children, with their pitiful cries of hunger, were the first to eat. After a few days, there was not enough food. The traders given the contracts to provide food for us provide less than what they are paid for, or deliver spoiled food that cannot be eaten. Today, a barrel of crackers was opened. All were blue with mold. Even the hungriest of us could not eat them. Also, some of the unspoiled rations are strange to our people who are used to fresh food from their farms or from the forest. My mother tells me that a sack of coffee beans was given to some of our people who had not seen coffee before. Instead of grinding the beans to make drink, they took the beans and boiled them and tried to eat them. Those who ate the bitter soup became very sick. It was also hard to cook with the white flour, which is not at all like our ground corn. Here again, some of our women tried cooking the flour into a soup. The result was impossible to eat. Were it not for those, like my mother, who gather from the surrounding countryside the wild foods, people would be starving here. July 1st, 1838. More of my strength has returned. I was well enough to walk about today, so I shall describe this place. We are within a great stockade pen with high walls and no roof. One could throw a stone from one side to another, but more than 700 people are now kept in here. It is hard to walk without tripping over someone's outthrust legs as they try to sleep, often on the bare ground. Some have made rude shelters from sticks and bark, using blankets to make walls for their tiny huts to set up shelter helter-skelter. People are trying their best to help each other. There is much courtesy, yet also much despair. It is not just the heat and crowding. It is not just the fact that the very young and the very old grow weaker each day. It is also the uncertainty. This is the only one of dozens of camps and forts collection points set up throughout our nation. Many here have been separated by their loved ones. Some were taken captive as they walked upon the roads or worked in the fields. Others saw their children run and hide in the woods while they themselves marched away. To his great credit as Christians, the officer in charge allowed some of those parents to go out on parole to seek their lost children, giving them a certain amount of time for their search. Though we are in captivity, it is still a Sunday. The Christian ministers among us, both Cherokee and white, held services, but my walk so tired me that I was unable to attend. July 2nd, 1838. Still no rain has fallen. The sun burns down upon us. The heat of so many bodies crowded together makes it hard to breathe at times. To get drinking water, we must go to the river. The water in the river has grown lower. The water is so low that the plan of sending all of the people west by boat no longer seems possible, according to one young Tennessee soldier who stops to speak with me now and then. We have learned which of the soldiers we must avoid, the ones who tend to abuse our people with words or subtle blows. This young Tennessean is not one of them. Though rough-hewn, he treats every Cherokee with courtesy. His name is Will. I believe that he is about my own age, and in some ways he reminds me of my friend Otter, whose own English name was William. Perhaps it is the way that this young white man turns to look sideways at me, or the way that he moves his hands, that makes me think of my lost friend. Because of that resemblance, I have taken to calling him White Will. At another time or another place, he and I might have been friends. White Will told me today that his father fought at Horseshoe and other battles at the War of 1812. The Cherokees were always by his side or leading the charge against the enemy. Pa said the Cherokee were the bravest and the best men there, White Will said. What are we now? I asked. His face became red as a boiled crawfish, and he quickly walked away. July 3rd, 1838. White Will sought me out today and sat with my journal. As I sat with my journal in my lap, there is little to do but sit. Somehow, sitting makes me more weary than the work about our farm ever did. I'm so tired that it's hard to lift the pen. Are ye writing about what it is like hereabouts? White Will asked. I held my journal out to him. You can read what I have if you like. His face turned that same crimson hue, and he shook his head. He looked around to see if anyone else could hear us, and then crouched down beside me to tell me that he could not read a word, nor write. Neither, he added, though that was scarcely necessary. I said nothing in return. What could I say? White Will stood up. I stood with him. There was something on his mind other than a confession of illiteracy. Leaning close and still whispering, he asked if he might ask me a favor. I shall give ye a favor for a favor in return, he added quickly. Yes, I said. Then he asked if I might be able to help him write to his ma and pa, putting down what he said onto paper. In return, he would tell me more about how things were hereabouts than I could put down in my book. Then he thrust out a hand. Deal? He asked. Deal, I said, and we shook on it.